Change lives.
Cambiar vidas.
Change lives.
Change organizations.
حياة.
改变世界。
Change organization.
Change the world.
Thank you all for including me. I'm not an MBA, as I said. I'm a wannabe MBA. I went to Stanford many moons ago. And in my day, I graduated in 1967. There were not that many women who went on to the business school. It was so rare. It was kind of like weird almost when a woman went on to business school. And to see so many powerful, amazing, accomplished, completely enlightened women in this room that are in business, that are entrepreneurs, that are running companies, that are doing incredible work in the world, all over the world, is just, it's so heartwarming for me. It almost makes me cry. So I just got to say, bravo, congratulations, hallelujah to all of you. Give yourself a big hand. So I went to a different kind of graduate school. After I graduated from Stanford, I got involved in making the world work, is kind of the business I got into. And my professors, my teachers, rather than being financial professors or economics professors, were the resource poor people on this planet. I got very, very deeply engaged and committed to ending world hunger, kind of a large to-do. And I got involved with starting and building something called the Hunger Project, which started with just 2 people and an idea in 1977, and now is in 100 countries around the world, has 375,000 full-time volunteers, is operating offices all over the place, and really working very, very powerfully in intervening in social structures and systems that hold hunger and poverty in place. And one of the primary and leading interventions for ending world hunger is empowering women, is ending the brutal, almost heartless, and unbelievably, almost unconfrontable subjugation of women that's taking place in places all over the world. And I imagine you're fairly familiar with it, but I'm intimately familiar with it. I'm up close and personal familiar with it. And when you work on hunger and poverty, you see atrocities, you see oppression, you see subjugation, you see suffering that is almost beyond what you can tolerate. But if you go toward it instead of resist it, what you see is the extraordinary human spirit of women, the unbelievable power that we have inside ourselves when there's no support and when one is being oppressed. The only place women and human beings can go is to find strength and courage within themselves. So my teachers have been people that I used to call poor. I actually used to call people poor, women poor. I would refer to them as poor women until I worked with them, until I was side by side in the dirt after the Ethiopian famine in 1984, 1985, helping women replant crops that had failed, that had been destroyed, until I was side by side with women and men, but mostly women in Bangladesh after a horrendous flood where they had to rebuild their homes, until I knew women who had been through such horrendous rape and violence and sexual conflict that you couldn't believe that they were upright. And then I realized to call them poor is so inappropriate and so not true, that who they are is whole and complete people, incredible people, who exhibit more courage to live through a day than any of us in this room are going to need in our entire lifetime. And to call them poor is to demean who they are and sort of demean us who would look at them that way, when in fact they're intelligent. They may not know how to read. They haven't been given that opportunity, no education. They're incredibly creative. If you have 10 kids and no food and nothing inside and no water in sight, you have to be incredibly creative to make it through a day. And they're innovative, and they network, and they support each other, and they draw on something that's deeper than any financial pocketbook is ever going to be, or any economy is ever going to give anyone. They draw on a spiritual power, a deep, profound understanding of their own humanity in a way that gets them through that day and the next day and the next day. And what I began to see when I really saw that these were my professors, these were my teachers, these were my mentors, these were my coaches, these were my godmothers, these were the people that I was going to learn from the rest of my life, that there was nothing poor about them. What's poor is the circumstances in which they live. And to label people by their circumstances is to diminish them and to diminish any of us. So to call them poor is something I never do now, and I talk about them the way they are, whole and complete, heroic, amazing people living in resource-poor circumstances, and that's what's poor. I also, as you probably would imagine, if you're working on ending world hunger, you have to raise a little money. So I became the chief fundraiser for the Hunger Project and designed our fundraising strategies all over the world, and I trained 50,000 fundraisers. I've raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's a real teaching of its own. And when you're a fundraiser, and I know many of you are, you're looking for those people that I used to call rich. And you want to know their phone number, and you want to know their email. At that time, there weren't emails, but you want to know everything about them. You want to know how to get an introduction. But as someone who now has raised hundreds of millions of dollars and trained other people to do so, and not just people like you and me, but people in Mozambique to raise money, not from the World Bank, but from Mozambicans, from each other. Taught people in Nigeria or Ghana or Senegal or India or Sri Lanka to raise money from each other. There wouldn't be large amounts, but the strength and power of asking people for money in resource-poor circumstances, asking people who think they're poor because they've been treated and labeled that by the rest of the world, and have them actually make a financial contribution to the betterment of their own situation or the village in which they live, liberates people, frees them, has them find something they didn't know was there. And so a lot of our fundraising was with people you would never in a million years ask for money, except we found that they have so much to give. And it's not in the big numbers, but it's in the incredible power of discovering that they have something to contribute. But, as I must say, when you're running a budget, and I think you all know about that, I did need to go to people that I used to call rich. And I don't call them rich any longer either. Even though, you know, it's what everybody wants to be, and perhaps what all of us in this room are or aspiring to be, or maybe are in spades. But when we label ourselves or others by our circumstances, it eclipses the whole and complete beauty of who we are. And when you label people rich, just like when you label people poor, what happens is you start to think, people start to think they are their stock option. They are their net worth. They start thinking they are their trust fund. And that is not who we are. We're people living in resource-rich circumstances and the ebb and flow of those resource-rich circumstances. But we, no matter what happens with those circumstances, want to remember that we're whole and complete people. We are not our private plane or our gated community. So in really working all through the spectrum from the ultra-wealthy people on Earth who are holding huge amounts of capital and resources, financial resources, to people living in absolute abject poverty, and many of them along that middle route there, and many of them women, I've learned a lot about money. Now, not the kind of thing that has me good at reading a balance sheet the way you can, not the kind of thing that has me be a savvy investor, unfortunately, but the kind of thing that I've learned about money is the dysfunctional, really tragic, and anxious relationship that almost everyone has with money, no matter who they are. No matter where they are on that big, long spectrum, even some of the people right at the top of the charts there are freaked out about money all the time. People who have way more than they can even spend. Not everybody, but some people in those ultra stratospheres of wealth are as anxious and upset and have as much suffering around money as people who can barely pay their rent. And not everybody, of course, and I wouldn't accuse any of you of this, but there might be a few people in here once in a while who have a little bit of anxiety about money and don't like talking about it, as we said before. So money has taken a place, a role in our culture. And I'm not talking about business now because, as I say, I'm not a businesswoman. I'm talking really pretty much about life. Money, and you could even say the economy, has taken a role that's so exalted, so lifted up, so worshipped, that it has confused our relationship with ourselves, in my view. And we have to remember that we invented money. We invented it as a human species about 4,500 years ago. Money historians say, they argue about when and where and all that stuff, but we invented it not that long ago, actually. And we made it up. It's our invention. Money does not grow on trees. We probably have paid attention to that, noticed that. Pennies do not fall from heaven. We invented money, and it's our creation, and yet we've become completely at the effect of that which we invented. And I would say because, and this is a little dicey to say, it's Stanford Business School graduate win meeting, but because we lie about it. The word lie is a kind of strong word. It's a little bit insulting, and I'm not insulting personally you or personally me, but the society in which we live, the global society, particularly in the United States, but it's all over the world, is our relationship with money is fraught with misunderstandings, with overblown importance, with a kind of worship that has us in a relationship with money that's inauthentic and as a society confusing for just about everybody. Now, that doesn't mean you, except you live in a society that's confused about money, that's made it more important actually than human life. You know, money was invented to facilitate the sharing of goods and resources with one another for the well-being of all, except now it's not really used that way all that much. It's used to marginalize, to accumulate, to bring together in a way that has power over. And so we have made money more important than human life in a society way. That's what I mean, not you and I. You and I know money's not more important than your relationship with your daughter or your son or your husband or your partner or your parents. Yet, if people observe the behavior of most of us, they would say, gosh, money's more important to that person than anything. And that's actually the way our society foments and fosters life. So I suggest that some of these lies, which I think is an inauthentic relationship with money, and I call it a lie to kind of insult it, are born of something that I call a condition that we've invented called scarcity. And I consider that a condition or a mythology that's gotten all over everything in life. Now, it makes sense to invent scarcity in a business, I think probably. I think that's probably part of what you do to make your product more interesting than the next one and make sure you get it before it runs out, etc. But this condition of scarcity, or what I'll call it, the lie of scarcity, in a culture that's consumerized and monetized and commercialized in such intensity that money has become the be-all, end-all. Instead of a tool that we use for the well-being of life, we have become servants to money. And so that is not an authentic or powerful relationship for human life or for the well-being of the world, and we all know that. And it creates this kind of imperative for growth. It creates a kind of clamoring for more. And this condition of scarcity is almost like a helmet we're wearing that we can't remember we have on anymore. I call it an unconscious, unexamined, whole network of assumptions where we actually, without thinking about it, look at the world as if, number one, there's not enough to go around and someone somewhere is always going to be left out, as if we really believe that's true, but we haven't really thought it through. It's just an unexamined, unconscious assumption about society, about life, about the world, that there's not enough. That's toxic myth, I call it, number one. Now, I want to remind you, I've worked on hunger and poverty. I'm now working on the environment. I'm very, very intimately familiar with the fact that there are places where people don't have enough food. There's places where people don't have enough water. I've held dying babies in my arms. I worked with women after the Ethiopian famine who lost every single one of their children to starvation. One woman had 11 children. All of them starved to death, and somehow she was this big. She was so slim and slender and skinny. She was still alive. I sat with her and 6 other women in a circle for 5 days and 5 nights as each one of the women in Ethiopia shared about the excruciating death, the starvation death of each one of their children, until we had honored each one of those little lives and they had completed the story of the death of those children. I will never, ever, ever get over that night, that day, that night, that day, that night, that day, that night, that day. They're here with me right now as I stand before you. And yet, once they had honored the life of each one of those children that had died from starvation, if you can imagine it, one of the women shared about having the baby, her really almost newborn 2-month-old baby, die suckling at her breast because she hadn't had water herself in 7 days. Can you imagine a baby dying on your breast? So this is like serious business I'm talking about, and these women were in such incredible mourning and tragedy and wailing that I didn't think they were going to make it through this session. And at the end of the 5 days and 5 nights, we rested, we stopped wailing, we stopped crying, and then they made a commitment to each other and to me that they would use the rest of their life as women without children, and their husbands had long since abandoned them, to make a difference in Ethiopia that would have no more women, no more mothers go through what they went through. And these are women who are totally uneducated, had never been to school. You can't tell when people are starving to death how old they are. They look very, very old, but I imagine they were in their 30s, maybe their early 40s. And I kept in touch with them over the years and actually paired those 7 women up with 7 women in an investment club in New York. Women in your position, women who had privilege, women who had education, women who had money, women who had opportunities, more opportunities than they could handle. And they became like sisters, those 14 women. And the 7 women in Ethiopia, we've lost track of 3 of them, but 4 of them went all the way through school, you know, starting really with kindergarten, all the way through school. 3 of them have a PhD, and 1 of them is a lawyer and is running the largest law firm in Ethiopia. 2 of the PhDs are in the Ethiopian government, and the other one runs a scientific institution in Ethiopia. And they didn't even start going to school until the incident that I'm telling you about. Somehow I got off in that tributary. I had to tell you about them. But what I want to get back to is this myth of scarcity that kind of runs our mindset, that there's not enough to go around. More is always better, and that's just the way that it is. There's not enough time, there's not enough money, there's not enough vacation, there's not enough weekends, there's enough Tuesdays, there's not enough Thursdays, there's not enough hours in the day, there's not enough hours in the night, there's not enough this, there's not enough that, there's not enough sex, there's not enough love, there's not enough, definitely not enough good men over 40. I know you've noticed that. That is true. But the there's not enough, it's not enough, has become a I'm not enough, and we've become a deficit culture, particularly women. Not just it's not enough, there's not enough, it's I'm not tall enough, I'm not thin enough, I'm not blonde enough, I'm not young enough, I'm not this enough, I'm not that enough. And if you're in advertising and marketing, you're doing a spectacular job of convincing us we need more of just about everything at every moment in time. So the second toxic myth in this scarcity model that I think we're kind of caught in is more is better. More of anything, more of everything, more of whatever is better. And it's kind of an indiscriminate more. And then the third toxic myth, first, there's not enough. Second, more is better. And third, that's just the way that it is and you got to go with it, is kind of a blindness in the commercial culture we live in that has us not recognize or ever really have an experience of fulfillment, prosperity, satisfaction, completion, and in particular, the distinction of enough. So let me go to that because that's kind of what I want to leave you with. And I've discovered in my work as a fundraiser, as a philanthropist, and as working on hunger and poverty, and now working on environmental issues with indigenous peoples of the Amazon, that what's missing in our culture is a respect for, a reverence for, an actual access to the exquisite distinction of enough. The powerful experience of sufficiency. And I'll tell you, I have a whole story about how I got there, and I don't have time to tell it to you, but I really, really got this in an encounter with the great Buckminster Fuller, that we now live in a world where we're doing so much more with so much less, really that we are, that we live in a world where there's enough for everyone, everywhere to have a healthy and productive life. As Gandhi said, there's enough for our need, but not for our greed. And if you start to actually think about that, it begins to change the very way you see the world. There's a principle that I call the principle of sufficiency. Now, I made it up, so I don't know if you can make up a principle. Maybe I discovered it. But I call it the principle of sufficiency, and it is this. If you can let go of trying to get more of what you don't really need, which is mostly what we're clamoring to get more of, it frees up incredible locked up energy that was all locked in that chase to turn and pay attention to what you already have. When you pay attention to what you already have, when you nourish it, when you make a difference with it, when you give it your attention and intention, what's already there, it expands naturally. So let me say that again. When you let go of clamoring to get more of what you don't really need, gaze being everywhere but where you are, it frees up oceans of energy to turn and pay attention to what you have. When you pay attention to what you have already, when you make a difference with it, when you nourish it, when you live in the exquisite distinction of what's already there, it expands naturally. I call this the principle of sufficiency, and a shorter way to say that whole thing is what you appreciate appreciates. What you appreciate appreciates. I say that you can't get to true abundance, through the portal of more. Through the portal of more, it will always lead you to lack, and then you'll need more again, and you'll get a high from that, but then it'll lead you to lack, and then you'll need more again. I say that the only route to true abundance, real abundance, that isn't excess, but natural abundance, is through the exquisite portal, doorway, distinction of enough, of sufficiency. When you're in touch with sufficiency, it overflows naturally into abundance. So I'm going to give you one metaphor that I think will help sort of keep this in existence for you in a culture that clamors for more, that says there's not enough, that's all about scarcity. And that is from my teacher and one of the people I greatly revere. I guess he's my mentor. I gotta think about that. He's my mentor, he's my sponsor, he's all that stuff. His name is Brother David Stendelrast. He's a Benedictine monk. He's 85 years old. He's the greatest living scholar in the world on gratefulness. Gratefulness. He goes into silence sometimes for a year or 2 years at a time. And when he comes out of silence, he has really great stuff to say. I can't tell you, it's so great. And I met with him after he'd been in Camaldolese down in Big Sur for 2 years in total silence. He came to my house shortly after that. Maybe it was a day or 2 days. I think he'd said something to someone. And I had a session with him, and I asked him, Brother David, given you're the greatest leading scholar in the world and recognized as the great purveyor and embodiment of gratefulness, what's the distinction, what's the difference between gratitude and gratefulness? And he said, he's really this cool guy, you would love him. He said, gratitude, Lynn, has 2 great branches. One is gratefulness, the other is thanksgiving. When you're in gratefulness, the bowl of life is so full that it's almost overflowing, but not quite. It's so full that it's bowed at the top, but not yet dribbling over the edges. And when you're in that experience, you're in the great fullness of life. You're one with God, if you think there is one. You're one with the universe. There is no other. It's just all one. And that's so fulfilling, so prosperous, so nurturing that the bowl of life overflows, and it's like a fountain, and that puts you over here in the other branch of gratitude, which is thanksgiving. And the bowl of life is constantly overflowing. And when the bowl of life is constantly overflowing, you're so grateful to discover, oh, there's an other, because all I want to do is give and share and contribute and serve with this incredible bounty. And that is so fulfilling, it puts you in the great fullness of life. So if you get my metaphor, this is sufficiency. This is the recognition, the distinction of enough. This is true abundance that flows only really from enough. And from living a life where the overflowing power of recognizing that you have enough, you are enough, you live enough, allows you to have that more flow from the enough rather than from the lack, rather than from the scarcity. And when it flows from there, all you want to do is share it. You become a natural philanthropist. You become a natural servant. You share, you give. You're just overwhelmed with the beauty and meaning of being someone who can make a difference with your life. So whether you are now a post-executive CEO, you're now a stay-at-home mom, or you are the CEO of a huge company, or you're an entrepreneur with a startup, or whether you're on the rise in a big company, no matter where you are, you can access the exquisite distinction of enough. And it doesn't mean you can't have more. It doesn't mean you can't be on a track to improve and grow your company, your family, your life. But I suggest that you consider the possibility that to be in the presence of sufficiency, to notice the bounty, the incredible blessing, the absolute miracle of your life will give you access to the meaning that you may be chasing that's already there, because it will overflow in a way that not only nurtures you, but nurtures the world. And I will remind you that those women in Ethiopia, the people that I've worked with all my life, women all over this world, I now have the profound privilege of being the strategist and chief consultant to the 9 living Nobel Peace Prize women laureates. And, you know, talk about awesome women and what they've been through. Aung San Suu Kyi, Rigoberta Menchú Tum of Guatemala, Jody Williams of the United States, Shirin Ebadi, who was head of the Supreme Court in Iran under the Shah and then was deposed by the Ayatollah, and now her entire law firm has been shut down. She was defending 80% of the women in prison in Iran, in prison for not wearing a veil, for driving a car, in prison for life in some cases for driving a car. All of her lawyers have been either jailed or killed. She's now not able to go back to her country, and she won the Nobel Prize, and she's as tough, as awesome, as committed as she's ever been. So that's just a handful of some of the great women that I've had the privilege of working with, including Mother Teresa, at whose feet I sat for many years. So it's all business, the business of making a difference, the business of contribution, the business of finding your way to your own heart. And so I invite you, I encourage you to recognize the enoughness, the bounty, the blessing in your own life, and that you're in the 1,000th of the 1% of the women in this world, and to find your way to recognize the enoughness in a way that it overflows into Thanksgiving, and you use your power, your resources, the now that is the only time we have, which is now, and it's permanent and it's always, to make a difference, particularly for the women in this world who will never, ever have the chances you've had. So I'll stop there. My time is up. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being such spectacular women, and for standing up for yourself in a way that you can stand for other women. Thank you for being at a conference that allows you to really delve into how to support women changing their companies, themselves, and the world. And thank you for inviting me to be part of it. So now I think it's question and answer. Thank you.
I'm Carla, and I wonder, in your experience, what do you believe money is the proxy for? Is it the proxy for freedom or safety, or what is it that really is pulling people toward money?
Oh, God, what a great question. Shoot, let me think. Do I have an answer for that? That's a great question. Well, I think we live in a culture that has lost its way with money, and it's become an icon of power, control, and domination. And people want that now, so that they can avoid being controlled, being dominated, or being powerless. Because it's used, unfortunately, in many cases, not all. Obviously, there's wonderful things being done with money by people in this room, but you can feel the prevailing kind of winds are that people with access to money often end up, you know, there's this, sorry if I can use your question to say a little metaphor that I didn't get to. I learned from a woman in Harlem that I was in a Harlem basement, you know, doing a fundraiser with people in Harlem, and this woman stood up, and this is in my book, The Soul of Money. It's one of my favorite stories, and I was asking for money, and most of the people there were people from Harlem, African-American people. They didn't have a lot of extra resources, and she stood up and she said, you know, money is just like water. It's got to flow. It's got to move. And when it moves, it purifies, it cleanses, it creates growth, it can nurture. But when it's held and hoarded, just like water, and over-accumulated, it starts to get stagnant and a little toxic to whoever is holding on to it, and they can't see any longer. And I thought that was a really incredible metaphor, because if we take only what we need and not a whole lot more than that, because we're not so terrified of being left out, which is kind of this scarcity model, then money can nourish and cleanse and purify and you know, water the world. So I think it comes from this distorted understanding of what money's really for. And it's a kind of energy. It's innocent. You know, my book is called The Soul of Money, not because I think money has a soul, but I know that we do. And we can give soul to money, and we can bring money into things that our soul longs to have happen in the world. And when money is an expression of our highest commitments, that's when we actually feel prosperous. Not when we have more money, but when we're directing money in a way that fulfills the highest commitments we have for our loved ones, our family, and the world in which we live. That's the source of prosperity. So when it's like that, then money is doing what its real job is, I believe. That's the best answer I can give you now, but I'll think about that. Thank you. Yes?
So this might not be very articulate, but I'm going to give it a shot. So as I was listening to your talk, and I've heard a lot of those themes before, I was thinking about some of the things we heard earlier and things I heard in my business school education about women and money. So women actually don't ask for money and don't value money as much, and a lot of the messages I've heard as a young professional woman was advocate for yourself and go after money because the men are doing it. And so how do you sort of, I guess I'm hearing some conflicting messages and I'm trying to put it all together. Does that make sense?
I hear you.
Okay.
Well,
so I don't know if it's a comment or a question, but it's something that I'm stewing on.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I think we're really, really good with money. Now, of course, I'm a little prejudiced because I am one, but I really think, I mean, if you think about our anatomy, not to get too graphic here, we are set up to receive. And out of receiving, we give birth. Men are designed differently, let's say. And I think women are the best fundraisers from the heart, I'll call it. I think we know how to receive. We sometimes don't think we do, but actually I think if we pay attention to what actually happens around women, we are great receivers. We're wonderful producers too. Men are, kind of designed to produce, and we're kind of designed to receive, and that's anatomical, but at the same time, we all can do everything. But I really think we just have a different relationship with money. And the conflict is we have a different relationship with money than men do, kind of naturally. And then if we try to emulate men and learn from them, that's helpful because then we have a broader spectrum of talent with money. And if more men would learn from us, that would be really, really good. There was that article, Time Magazine had about 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, they had a cover, Women Are the Richer Sex. Did anybody see that? It was wonderful. I have it with me. And women are more and more and more in charge of money in the United States. We have much, much more access now than we did when I was in college. It's just changing every minute. And you are a huge part of that. And I think that will change the dynamic of humanity's relationship with money, with more women in charge of and in control, you could say, or responsible for, I think is a better term, because I think that's what we do. We don't necessarily control money, we're responsible for it, which is a much healthier relationship. I think we'll see changes in the way everybody relates to money, and I hope that's the way that it goes. So I can't resolve the conflict. I can say the distinction and the diversity and the difference is something to respect, not try to reconcile, but to expand and include, I'll say. Thanks. Back there with the...
You've been doing this long enough to have seen business cycles. You've been in different parts of the world where there are different levels of abundance. And I'm struck by, over the last few years, how much of a sense of scarcity there is that's portrayed through the media. There's this kind of constant, frantic tone about, we're all on the precipice, we're all going over the brink. And I'm curious about how, over the time that you've been doing this work, you've seen evolution in the way people's attitudes towards money responds to the larger circumstance of, are we in a time of abundance or a time of scarcity in the economy?
Okay. Well, we have 1 minute for that huge question. But I'll say that this is not an answer, okay? It's a response. I don't have an answer to that question exactly because I'm not a researcher. I'm not McKinsey. Where is Susie? Susie, tell Susie to work on that. I'm not a researcher. It's all anecdotal. It's all just wandering around the world doing my thing. But I will tell you something that is probably not even related to your question that I want to say, and your question is my excuse. Can I do that? I think the financial crisis, quote unquote, is one of the best things that's ever happened to us. Now, I know it's painful. I know personally, I know people who have lost their homes. I know people who are destitute as a result. I worked with the Madoff Survivor Group, 150 families who lost everything, and they read my book, Soul of Money, and I did conference calls with them once a week so that they could recover their sanity because they were, you know, suicidal, these 150 families. So I know the financial crisis has been really painful. So I don't want to diminish that at all. At the same time, I work in the environment now. I work with indigenous peoples of the Amazon. That's my most recent thing, who never even knew there was such a thing called money. You know, they say you can't hunt for it, you can't eat it. Why would you want it? You know, to them it's like weird. This financial downturn, crisis, meltdown that we've been going through, that's such a huge hot topic, and I know there's thousands and thousands of reasons for it. I think that the source of it ultimately is that it's time for a financial cleansing. It's time for a purification. It's time for a recalibration with our relationship with money and growth and the economy. We cannot continue doing what we're doing, and everybody knows it now. And a fact that's important to tell you, and you probably know stuff like this, please forgive me if I'm repeating something you've studied, but in 1987 was the year when the human family went over a line, a very, very dangerous and critical line, which is we now use more resources from the earth than she can regenerate. And it was 1987 when we passed that line. Just the human family, not the other animals even, we use more resources from the earth than she can regenerate. 1987 was when we went over the line. So we're now bankrupt in our relationship with the ecology. Notice eco. Pundits, historians, people, ecologists said it in 20 to 25 years we'll have a huge financial crisis because the entire economy is based on the ecology, and the ecology is now going into debt. So we now use, as of today, 2012, 41% more resources than the earth can regenerate. That's like living off an ecological credit card you can never pay back. We can't pay it back. So one theory, one thing I assert, is that the financial downturn is the early warning signs, the purification, the recalibration, the purification, you know, the kind of shaking of us that we won't see the end of until we begin to live within our ecological means, which will allow us to once again find a way to live within our economic means, because the two are totally related. So I'm not an economist, I'm not an ecologist, I'm me, but that seems really clear to me. So I offer that as a way to look at your future, the future of business, the future of humanity, and the future of women, because we know our intuition is way more active, and we pay much more attention to it than the other sex. And many people that I work with call this the Sophia century. The century when women will take their rightful role in co-equal partnership with men. And the indigenous people say, this is the century, this is the 100 years, when the eagle of humanity, which has been flying with one wing overflying and over-muscled, and the other wing broken and a little bit weak, so humanity's been flying in circles. This is the century when the other wing, the wing of humanity, which is female, will be strong enough to actually fly, and the other wing will stop being so nutty. And we will fly together in the same skies, and the world will come into balance. And that's an indigenous prophecy that makes a lot of sense to me. And you are the key. You are the answer. You are the game changers. You're not just changing your companies, changing women, and changing the world. You're the game changers for humanity. So I bow to you, I thank you, and hallelujah, go forth and multiply.
change lives,
cambiar vidas,
change lives,
change organizations, 改变世界
change organization,
Change the world.